1 in 4 kids in this country who get permanently excluded will die before the age of 25, and at least half of the students who attend alternative provision will be NEET within 3 months of leaving school at 16. What I'm trying to do is kind of the bifold approach of, since nobody wants to feed that pipeline, let's blow the pipeline up and let's show you how whatever role you're doing in a school, this is how you can. You remember when marginal gains was a thing before we realized that sky cycling was cheating just like everybody else? They just did it better. Yeah, okay, I'm just a TA. No, you're not. You can add X of a percentage point that's going to keep that child moving forward. And therefore, can we, as a country, make PX a legacy? So if we can remove that designation and look about working earlier and earlier upstream. I mean, there was a time, even in the last 8 years, where you'd never permanently exclude a kid with an EHCP. What would you do? You'd have an emergency annual review and see if this is the provision for them, what is the right provision? And that could be a different school, but it also could be, what could we be doing differently? And thinking about every child who is in danger of permanent exclusion as having that same opportunity.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the EduFuturist podcast. We are very pleased that you've decided to join us. We've got another guest in the studio that we're going to introduce in a moment. And just so you know, if you're only listening, you are missing out on Ben being in a overshirt, ladies and gentlemen. That is a real thing. It doesn't happen very often. But yeah, I think the beard is growing. The overshirt is on. I'm going up in the world, my friend. First time, Steve, I reckon, possibly. I might be looking all right.
I know, you can tell it's brand new as well, straight out of the packet, because you've either ironed it, which is the first time ever, or you bought it and taken it out of the packet. So, like, if I was to see, you can see the lines where it's folded underneath, but just making sure strategically that your camera's just positioned above the
crease.
Yeah,
I've just got underpants on, just so you know.
Absolutely.
That's not great for anybody else.
That's what we always do, though. That's what we always do. But why is it that I'm the only person not wearing a shirt today? I'd say I'd wear a shirt, but that's absolutely a lie. It's very rare do I wear a shirt and not on the podcast.
But you did wear a tuxedo, my friend.
I did, and rocked it, apparently. That's what people said. They were very kind with their words, which is always a nice thing. Some people say you can't polish a so-and-so, but clearly you can. And he did all right, mate. So, well, should we dive in?
We should dive in, because we have got a guest in the studio. And for those of you who are not familiar with the wonderful Stephen Steinhaus, who will introduce himself in a moment. Stephen, I met him first of all on a Parent Pay GDPRIS webinar this time last year, where we were talking about alternative provision and SEND and inclusion and the importance of that. And then Stephen kindly joined us on one of our more recent EduFuturist webinars on the place of alternative provision. Now, Stephen's insight there was, a lot of people have come back to us and said, is there going to be a longer form conversation there? Because the conversation with that American fella was brilliant. And also the things that you talked about in terms of permanent exclusion and I can't wait to dive into that today. So, Stephen, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Please tell our guests who may not have watched that webinar, those naughty people that didn't join in, please tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Thank you both. And actually, I'm the suit in this conversation, and it's taken me a while to embrace the fact that I am the suit in some of these conversations. But usually, it would be a hoodie or some sort of like death metal vest in my free time, but you've got the collared shirt as well. So, Steve, I've let you down, man. I've let you down. I do apologize. But I am I'm born and raised on the west side of Chicago, and I am the co-founder and now CEO of the Solihull AP Multi-Academy Trust. We were founded as a single academy free school in April 2018. And now we have 3 academies, 7 sites with an 8th site under construction, a 4th academy, which is a free school that is pending planning permission in Central Warwickshire, and a number of other projects on various states of boiling to simmering, to marinating, to, as they say in Scotland, steeping. But I'm not sure where that puts us. So it's an exciting time. But my background is as an English and drama teacher. And prior to that, as an American footballer, actually, I was always very heavily into sports, and sports and PE and fitness are one of the key sort of areas and components of what we try to do in the trust. But lifelong Chicago Bears, Chicago Cubs, and Chicago Bulls fan. So currently suffering mightily due to that fact. But there we go.
I'm a Celtics fan, Boston Celtics
Well, that's
fan.
right.
So
Celtics are my second team.
Okay, good.
My old man grew up in Nebraska till the age of 8, and they didn't have any
Nice.
professional sports teams. So he supported the Brooklyn Dodgers because of Jackie Robinson, and he supported the Boston Celtics because of Bill Russell, who in my mind is the greatest of all time. Although I grew up with Jordan, so Celtics, I'm all right. And I have to say I'm rooting against the Knicks in the finals at the moment. I don't think that it's going to go the way I want it to go, but there you go.
No, I'm not sure either. I'm conscious that you mentioned obviously being in American football. There's obviously another little thing that I know a lot of people might be interested in terms of a little bit of background, and then what brought you over to the UK really in terms of. I know you've talked about the work you're doing, and I can't wait for us to dig into that, because I think many of the listeners, whether this side of the pond or the American side of the pond, will be really interested, and around the world, how you're navigating alternative provision is wonderful, and I'm looking forward to digging into it. But yeah, tell us a little bit about how you got here, and that.
Steve, do you want me to tell the story? The
No, I'm not
Shakespeare
interested.
lecture story?
I'm interested in stories. Absolutely. I was going to say, I have been to quite a few Chicago games. I've been to a Bears game. I've been to a Blackhawks game. And I think
You've been to the Madhouse. The
I
Madhouse
have, yeah.
on Madison. Fantastic.
I don't really know Chicago that well, but I just know that I have been a couple of times. My friend lives there, but he does. I don't think I think he's near Winnetka.
Yeah, that's north.
So
That's north.
everybody goes.
That's the area where they filmed Home Alone and Breakfast Club and all that is up
Yeah, been to all of those areas. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
anyway, you dive in. Tell me about Shakespeare. I'll tell you about Home Alone, and you tell me about Shakespeare.
Well, I guess my story is ridiculous. I know that. I think it's hilarious. If you can make yourself laugh, you know. But actually, when I was in high school, originally the thought everybody had was, yeah, great student and all of that, except in art. But let's not talk about that. And it looked like I was going to play baseball. You know, when I was 14, I was throwing 80, 85 miles an hour. Our team was, I was playing as a year 10 on a team with year 13s, and we won the summer state championship and all this, and away we go. And blew my arm out, so and stopped growing. So I'm 6'4", which is not tall for the position I played in basketball. So I was going to play American football at university and didn't get the sort of deal that I wanted with that. So decided I was going to go and pay my own way, but play American football at the University of Illinois, which I have been a lifelong fan of the Fighting Illini as well. And I had a guidance counselor, which I guess the closest thing over here would be somebody like a careers advisor, but it's a much bigger role in the American system. I had a guidance counselor named Peg Fisher, and she suggested I apply for this program at the University of Illinois called the Campus Honors Program. And me in my mulleted, rolled jeans, Reebok pumped pomposity, decided I'll show them, I'll write it in pencil. So I hand wrote the application, and they rejected me, rightfully so. So Peg Fisher calls me out of some lesson my last term of high school. She says, Steinhaus, sit your big ass down there. And I went, what did I do? And she's looking at me like that. I can't make eye contact with her. She's looking at me like this. And she picks up the phone and she puts it, as she's staring at me, and she calls the Campus Honors Program. And she asks for the director, and she gets put through, and she said, I have a very embarrassed and very stupid 18-year-old in front of me who needs to be part of your program. What does he need to do to prove that he will not make the mistake of looking at an opportunity like that and not taking it seriously again? And essentially, she got me a redo, and I reapplied, got in. And in my second year of university, I was in an honors symposium for Shakespeare. Now, there are not a huge number of Shakespeareans from the neighborhood that I grew up in. So it was rather unique, and there were not a huge number of Shakespeareans who looked like me, 6'4", 250 pounds, Megadeth t-shirts and the whole ridiculousness, And as I'm walking out of one of the lectures, we had just done Henry IV, Part 1, the Boar's Head scene, where Falstaff and Hal it's the first time they're trading back and forth, and I played Falstaff. I know, typecasting. And as I'm walking out of the lecture theater, the professor grabs me, Michael Mullen, God rest his soul. Michael Mullen grabs me and he says, "You're Stein, right?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what they call me." And he said, "Well, I want to show you something." And he shows me the academic report he has to file with the American football team on a weekly basis. And it says, "Congratulations on your victory this weekend. I have the real pleasure of teaching Stephen Steinhaus, and having watched him play this weekend, I can say honestly that he's a far better Shakespearean than American footballer." And I'm like, "Oh, dude, you're killing me." But he was right. And he said, basically, when you figure it out, let's sit down and change your life. And took me about a year and a half to figure out I was never going to play professional football. I was never going to make it in the NFL. I should have played rugby, actually, but that's a different story. And I went to see him, and he became a very close mentor and friend, and he helped me get the Fulbright scholarship, which over here most people wouldn't know, except possibly from the Paul Simon song "I Know What I Know." So she looked me over and guessed I thought it was all right in similar way for a off night. And I said, "Aren't you the woman who was recently awarded the Fulbright?" So that's how most people over here know it, is from Graceland. But and I was given the opportunity to study Shakespeare in England because Michael said, "This is what you should do with your life." And that had a real impact on me, doubly so because both my parents are teachers. My grandmother was a teacher. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse, like Little House on the Prairie, out in Nebraska and all this. And so the Fulbright came in, and the very next week, Ben, I'm at the bar where I was working the doors. I know, typecasting, where I'd also been DJing a heavy metal show and working as a short order cook, which is hilarious to anybody who knows me now because I can't cook. And a representative for Roadrunner Records comes walking in, and he's pitching a couple of bands and wants me to play the CDs on the show, both of whom are still going. I think Obituary from Florida and Machine Head, Rob Flynn, despite the hair dye, he's an artist. And he's looking at me like this, and he went, "They said you were big, but I didn't know you were that big." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, my other job is I work for the WCW." Now, fans of the 80s and 90s wrestling know the WCW is a competitor with the WWE and all that. And he says, "How'd you like to come and work for me? We'll do a 6-week training session in a gym in downtown Chicago, which was owned by one of the Legion of Doom, one of the Road Warriors, had a stake in it. So we'll train you for 6 weeks, and then we'll get you out on the circuit." And I said, "That's awesome, but I'm going to England to study Shakespeare." And he says, "That's even better. Call me when you come back." So I turned down a wrestling contract to come and study Shakespeare here. And whilst I was here, blew up my left leg playing rugby, a proper game. And so I've got a metal ankle, I've got a metal hip, and I've never been able to wrestle again. So I know the fundamentals and the bumping and running and whatnot, but I never got to actually get out on the circuit. So my catchphrase in my little blurb when I do like keynotes and things is, "Stephen Steinhaus turned down a wrestling contract to study Shakespeare," because it's true. It's ridiculous, but it's true.
And just for our northern listeners, north of England listeners, when you say rugby, do you mean rugby union or rugby league? Just to
I
clarify,
mean,
is it?
I'm in the Midlands, so union. I
Yeah.
tried rugby league once, and I threw up every ounce of my guts trying to keep up with how they do that. I do not know. It is a different level of humanity to play rugby league.
And this is the interesting
Insane.
bit where there's a massive debate in terms of north and south of how difficult and which one is better and all those kind of things. Us in the north would say you played kick and clap rugby. You in the south would say you played the dirty coal mining rugby and all of those kind of things. And because it's a north-south divide, but both sports too physical for me. Wrestling, definitely. The interesting thing is you seem to know more about American football, rugby union, and Shakespeare than me. Rugby union and Shakespeare.
And you used to be a PE teacher, Steve.
Rugby union is definitely not something that we taught, and Shakespeare is definitely. I think Midsummer Night's Dream is what I learned in GCSE English.
Yeah, you would have done.
But other than that,
I bet you did Romeo and Juliet as well. Everybody does. A bit of Macbeth. No,
not at all. No, to be fair, they probably did. I just probably wasn't in class at the time, so that's probably a bit I missed as I stepped in and focused down for the last 2 weeks before
Well, Steve, if we ever get you down here in the West Mids, and I'll take you around the different sites. We do a little golf cart tour. But we'll go to Stratford. We'll do the potted history of why Shakespeare does and does not matter. Catch a show at the Royal Shakespeare Company and do the whole thing. It's fantastic.
Definitely matters. It's just the fact that anything from secondary school is probably, I'd say a blur, but it's probably just not learned. It's not as if I didn't listen. I just probably wasn't there, or wasn't in class, or wasn't allowed to listen. So my experience was close to probably alternative provision as I should have got, and definitely was not in secondary school as much as I should be. Interesting of how I got here. But yeah, so why, as you step into that and you start to study and think Shakespeare over wrestling, how alternative provision then? How does that happen? Because when you say Shakespeare, it doesn't really, for those people who don't really know, think all neats are naughty boys and girls. Anybody in alternate provision is because of behaviour. When you really look at, when you say alternative provision to people, generally the population of society thinks that the kids who are disruptive and the ones who can't go that. And we know our webinar will shine a real light on personalised experience and the great work that's been done. But even me, and I've worked in some alternate provision, and I think even Shakespeare enter there, and I've only ever seen you this way up in terms of the screen. So I imagine you being 6 foot wide and being 7 foot tall. I'm thinking like Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior kind of esque. Like,
more stone cold, I would say.
Right, well, that's absolutely fine. Smashing a beer, but how does all of this mix to get to developing, creating, and it's now leading an alternate provision?
I think the link to all of it, it's not that far away and disparate from each other. So I came over and I was going to, MPhil thesis was going to be on studying staging battles in Henry V. And I had real imposter syndrome because here I was, a big dumb meathead from the west side and west suburbs of Chicago, American footballer in the world of, corduroy patches on the jackets and these big hitters in the world of Shakespeare. And I was having a discussion with Russell Jackson, who was my tutor at the time, and he's Kenneth Branagh's textual advisor. So when Branagh did all the Shakespeare films in the 80s and 90s, Russell Jackson advised him on the script and the iambic pentameter and whatnot. And he said, well, what is it about Shakespeare that appeals to you, and what is it about you that Shakespeare can meet at your sort of point of entry? Because my sort of point of entry at that point was stage combat because of the wrestling. And I started thinking about the work that I've been trained as a teacher, and the work that I'd done in my student placements, and the work that my dad did working on the west side of Chicago. He was a physics teacher in a predominantly Hispanic high school of 3,800 students, one of these massive deals. And I had done a project when I was at university with Michael Mullen, my professor, on Shakespeare in Latin America. So I started thinking about, okay, where does all this cross over? And then I started reading about the national curriculum. Now, back in the 90s, you'd have SATs in year 9 and you'd have your GCSEs. So you would have to, if you were in, compulsory education, you would have to be examined on Shakespeare. And I started to look at the cultural implications of that, but also the pedagogical opportunities within that. If this is something that everybody has to study, and in an increasingly diverse society, as the United Kingdom continues to be, but certainly even was in the 90s. And so I narrowed it to a focus of what is the best practice in England in teaching culturally diverse, including second language speaking cohorts of students in urban mainstream education, and really focused in on that. And, was in Manchester and Bradford, Leeds, London, working with kids and teachers and practitioners. Did a lot of work with different theater companies. National Theater did a cross-cast version of The Tempest, and they let me tag along on tour and things like that. And really just absorbed all of that in, wrote the thesis actually fairly quickly. And what it did was it sort of catalyzed me moving more towards the arts side of education, because then you had this mammoth looking, professional wrestling looking biker guy who could teach Shakespeare, who could teach stage combat, who could teach all these dramatic subjects. So when I moved back to the States and taught in Hawaii and then in California, I was teaching English and drama. And then when we moved back to England in 2000, almost exclusively drama, performing arts, things like that. And I have a side profession or career, my side hustle, which sounds awful from a man my age, but my side hustle is I'm a musician. So I'm the music director for the Upton Blues Festival, which is in the UK Blues Hall of Fame. I host that festival. I book bands. I host a number of other festivals, and I'm a singer and performer. Used to tour around the UK with an 8-piece rhythm and blues band and all of that. And a parent at a school where I was director of performing arts, which was in the old specialist school days, the SSAT and all that, saw me perform. And I came off stage and he points at me and he says, "I have a project for you." And it took me a second, but I recognized who he was. It helps that he's American as well. So, we tend to remember each other. And his name is Dr. Craig Fees, and he was the chief archivist for the Planned Environment Therapy Trust based in Gloucestershire, which housed the records of care homes and schools that had worked with, back in the 50s, what were referred to as maladjusted or disturbed children. All of these schools and institutions had been razed to the ground, and his archive handled the collected records of all these schools and all these children and all these staff. And he said, "We've got a Heritage Lottery Fund grant to do this. I need you to create a touring show that will bring some of these stories and ideas to life. Could you do that with your students?" And I said, "Well, let me spend a day in the archive and see what you're talking in terms of source material and what we can devise from that." And about halfway through the morning, I went and found him and I said, "It's on. It is on like a bomb. This is unbelievable," because they had like student parliaments and all of these things that we talk about now in terms of student voice and empowerment and whatnot was happening with kids who had nothing and were in these places. And I thought, this is going to change. This is going to change the world. This is going to change education. And it's starting to now, even though this was 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, but it's starting to, because what it changed most was me. It brought me back to, this is why I wanted to go into teaching in the first place, is every day you have the opportunity to change the future. And it shaped so much of my thought processes. And even now, so much of what we do across the trust that still has my DNA in it. And thankfully for everybody involved, not everything does anymore. In the early days, my fingerprints went on everything. But now as we've diversified and grown, the team is so strong and successful that it doesn't have to just come from me. But that original impetus, the kick in the backside, came from that project. It was called, this is the great title as well, it was called Other People's Children, which I constantly said, "Who's down with OPC? Yeah, you know me." And everybody would just look at me like, yeah, as you guys are looking at me now. And so the art side and the creative side kind of brought me back to why I wanted to teach in the first place, which was to give access to the kids for whom access wasn't necessarily natural to the curriculum and to the opportunities the curriculum and the futures that the curriculum could engender. And so when we talk about AP and our trust, I say all the time, as you say, Steve, people talk about it's a Borstal, it's a naughty lads place, it's a unit. No, it's not. It's curriculum intervention, curriculum innovation, and social justice. And that's I don't know if I would have framed it that way if I hadn't come that circuitous route that just took me 25 minutes to explain to get there. So Craig Fees, Dr. Craig Fees, is one of who we refer to as the elders of SATMAT, because it was he was one of the key inspirations to drive what we're trying to do.
And everything about what you're talking about there makes it clear of why we wanted to get you in on a longer podcast there, because you have gone from could have done this, got an option, it went a bit squiggly, decided, do you know what? Fulbright scholarship, do Shakespeare. Did Shakespeare, opportunity, squiggly into music, squiggly into festivals, squiggly into teaching, and then going, actually, the stuff that was invested in me by my parents and grandparents in terms of social justice and how education genuinely is a leveler and an opportunity lives out. And you can clearly see, it doesn't matter whether we've had a monologue for a period of time, what we can see is somebody who lives and breathes what they're talking about. And that is something that is rare in many sectors, and in education it can be there's so many people that are really living a vocation, and that comes across clearly in what you're talking about. I think we'll get into all sorts of parts from it, but I'm going to jump to a piece that resonated with me as a neurodivergent human being, or late diagnosed in that space, as somebody whose brother didn't fit in mainstream from his learning difficulties and his complex learning needs, and also somebody who is watching not just his own children and other people's children, where the mainstream setting is not fit for purpose for every learner. And actually, we got into that conversation in the webinar about alternative provision, of whether we like that phrasing and whether it should just be provision. And Steve, I know you're quite passionate in that space, aren't you, buddy? But something that really resonated, and the thing that I keep holding back to, is your views around permanent exclusion and what that looks like. And I think we've got an issue. In fact, I don't think an issue. I think we've got a wicked problem in the UK around the obsession with exclusion, and particularly around and what that then means. And we've had recently in the UK had a report about NEETs and the challenges around NEETs, which plus the massive issue that is permanent exclusion. I wonder if you could talk about what your position is on that, because I think it's quite radical and necessary.
Yeah, I mean, as a CEO and system leader of alternative provision, I don't think it's my role to tell mainstream heads what they can and can't do or what they should do. But I do think it's my role to work within the system to increasingly, and actually the white paper, if any of it starts to actually land and stick in terms of some of the tier one work and some of the expert at hand work, to say, what is the actual outcome we are seeking from permanently excluding a child? Now, having worked in mainstream, and I was a fixer when I was in mainstream, I actually consciously took a role so that I could understand how the system worked in terms of feeding into pupil referral units and alternative provision. And I was the get rid of guy, right? This kid needs to go find somewhere. And actually, if you rotate that thought process, you can rotate it two ways for me. One is, this provision that we are putting in front of this child is never going to meet the needs that they have. Let's find them better provision. Yeah. But there's a duality there, particularly post-COVID, post-austerity, post the advent of smartphone parenting and all of these things that are being brought to bear now. Is there's two ways of doing that. There is the out of sight, out of mind, put them somewhere, and not just put them somewhere so they're not here, put them somewhere that does the job better than us for that kid, that has the curriculum that fits for that child. But also, the best mainstreams understand that doesn't necessarily mean bricks and mortar and off-site. That means that alternative provision is a mindset. Alternative provision is a curriculum skeleton key that says, okay, yes, we might create a new pathway within our mainstream provision for this child, but also let's take it even one lily pad further, is that within my English classroom, I know there are children, not children who are not connecting with what I'm doing, children who, if I don't change, will never connect with what I'm doing. And I would venture that the vast majority of us who've gotten into teaching did it to change lives. We did it to engage children. We did it to change the future. And what the present situation is we have the opportunity to change what teaching looks like, so that it's not that there's just provision and not alternative provision. I would phrase it as everything is alternative provision. And if we're doing it that way, that means I quote the movie Babe more often than I would like, but when the horse is talking to Ferdinand, the duck, and the horse says, well, the way things are the way things are. And Ferdinand says, well, the way things are sucks. That approach of that worked yesterday, that worked for that cohort, that worked for that class, that worked for the last 15 years for me as a teacher or for us as a department. And I don't just mean that approach or technique. It might be that text. It might be that qualification. It might be that course. It might be that timetable. With the needs that are not being met in mainstream, the more that mainstream can think we are the first line of alternative provision in all those facets. It might be curriculum, it might be pathway, it might just simply be pedagogy and diet within the construct of a full mainstream timetable. Not one person I can talk, and I'm all over the place in terms of going into mainstream secondaries and primaries and AP and special and whatnot. I've never met anybody who went, you know what? 1 in 4 kids in this country who get permanently excluded will die before the age of 25, and at least half of the students who attend alternative provision will be neat within 3 months of leaving school at 16. I want to feed that pipeline. Nobody says that. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of the bifold approach of, since nobody wants to feed that pipeline, let's blow the pipeline up and let's show you how whatever role you're doing in a school, this is how you can you remember when marginal gains was a thing before we realized that sky cycling was cheating just like everybody else? They just did it better. Yeah. Okay. I'm just a TA. No, you're not. You can add X of a percentage point that's going to keep that child moving forward. And therefore, can we as a country make PX a legacy? And just like we have students who eventually will come in to school who've never experienced COVID or never experienced X, Y, and Z, wouldn't it be wonderful as a country in a state system, the punishment of PX should only be that stamp on a piece of paper that says you've been PX'd. The provision should be meeting that need. If you feel you have to punish, trust me, the child will feel the punishment whether you PX them or not, because they're struggling. They don't want to be struggling. So if we can remove that designation and look about working earlier and earlier upstream. I mean, there was a time, even in the last 8 years, where you'd never permanently exclude a kid with an EHCP. What would you do? You'd have an emergency annual review and see if this is the provision for them, what is the right provision? And that could be a different school, but it also could be, what could we be doing differently? And thinking about every child who is in danger of permanent exclusion as having that same opportunity. Because in some schools, and I've done it, I've led those meetings that says it's not an emergency annual review of your provision. It's a stage 5 meeting telling you this is your last chance. And that fundamental cultural shift of, we have the power to make one of the most caustic experiences that any child or parent or carer or staff member. My gosh, I'm still scarred by the kids I had to permanently exclude. And I use the word had, which is a lie, because did I have to, or could I work differently? Maybe I was ignorant and I didn't know what else I could have done. So I don't want any of my mainstream colleagues to be in that position of, we've done everything that we can, and there's nothing else that we can do or anyone else can do. If I truly believe that if we work together, there's always an alternative to that PX designation. Am I going to argue that it should be outlawed? No, because then it's a done to, as opposed to a collaborative, we are signing up to this, we are going to stand for something better. Because we know what the statistics say happens to a child when they are permanently excluded. And again, ain't none of us got into this profession for those statistics to stand. And anyone who reads those statistics should be enraged, should be made nauseous, and should be picking up an axe handle and say, all right, let's go to work. What do I got to do to ensure that? And that sounds ridiculous, but that, road to Damascus, I had that road to Damascus moment and went, I'm kind of paraphrasing Gone with the Wind, as God is my witness. But literally, I went, I will never do this again. There has got to be a better way. And there is. And it's system working, joined up, special, AP, mainstream, primary, secondary, and making a commitment. We are going to find a better way to do this. And I truly believe we can do it. I've seen it work. And it's amazing what happens when you take something off the table and say, this is no longer an option. We're an intelligent workforce. We're a very highly educated workforce. We're a very experienced workforce. There's enough people working on it that we should be able to reverse that river and find a different way to do it. And if somebody said, in a Don Quixote moment, what's the windmill that you have left to kind of tackle? I think it's probably that.
Really interesting, the whole conversation. I've just been sitting here thinking, I've unmuted myself about 15 times and then gone, all right, I'll just sit and listen a little bit more because I think it's really relevant. I think when we say profession, often people then go, you mean educators or educators that become leaders? But actually, there are so many people in the village of learning and in a school or an organisation or a building or that wrap around those co-professionals. I think I've been telling and saying the message that I shared, I think it's 10 years I've been kind of talking about it in regards to the JFK moment in NASA. And when I'm working with teams, I'm constantly saying JFK NASA conversation around when JFK went into NASA and he came across the first person. I don't know whether this is a true story or it's become elaborated on. And he met a janitor, for those UK listeners, a cleaner, and said, "What do you do?" He was probably, or they were probably carrying a broom, so it was a silly question. But he probably expected a response of, "What do you do?" And the response to be, "I clean the floor." But the response was so relevant, I think, to any profession. It isn't just, and he said, "I'm sending somebody to the moon." And I think if you're an educator and you think my responsibility is learning, brilliant. But what about the leaders? What about the receptionists? What about the IT professionals? What about the cleaners? What about the catering staff? And I think AP gets this more than anything else because it builds a village of support. And actually, getting people into a physical classroom to learn is an end result of I'll say a million, of tens to hundreds, thousands of people in alternate provision.
Yeah.
To just get them to the gate.
Yeah.
To get them on the bus, to get them to the gate, to get them into reception, to get them into a space, to get them into the canteen, to get them into that building is just as difficult as that educator saying, now it's time for learning. And I think if we remember that if you step into the profession of educating and supporting young people in alternate provision or any provision, you are sending these children to the moon. You are responsible for supporting them with their learning experience. And if you want to be a receptionist in education, you have to face that fact or go work at Aldi. And if you want to be an IT professional in education, embrace that you might have to have conversations and not sit behind a door that's shut because you could be an IT manager in a bank. If you want to manage exams, you could probably do an administrative role anywhere else. If you want to be a HR professional, if you want to be a leader, I think go in any other industry. And you might make more money and you might do other things. But if you want to make a difference, there is a reason why people are in that profession. And why is it that people are a receptionist? And it's not that they don't care, they just forget and they just get transactional. Step into alternate provision and see. And I think there's a lot that all of the provision and sectors and educators can learn and the wraparound care from alternate provision because it seems to really start and meet the learners where they're at. Those people that drive around and go, I know you're not going to come in. I know you've had challenges and you're probably speaking in front of mum and dad or grandma and granddad or carers that have probably been in exactly the same situation and didn't attend school anyway. So you're meeting them where they're at and they're driving around. What about those roles, those job coaches, all of these people and meeting those learners to just get them into a building all online to learn? And the last 10% is just a little bit of learning. My worry is all of this innovation, all this great practice, they step in temporarily or for a period. They then go back to verbal sing and all the other people and say, right, you sit quietly and your corridors are silent. And these people are like, fuck you. I'll swear and say, absolutely not. What are you talking about? I've had the best learning experience ever for the last 8 weeks. And now you put me back in the box that I said I didn't really want to. And it's just that cycle, isn't it? It's just a real challenge. But I go back to that, what you said in regards to it takes a village, and that link to every person has a responsibility to support learners in education, regardless of your title on your role, regardless.
Yeah.
And I think that's key.
We talk about it all the time. I quote the Blues Brothers daily, if not weekly, and saying, you know, if you're deciding to work in AP, it is a holy thing. It is a sacred thing. And it's going to take every ounce of you, because every moment is a teachable moment, and every ounce of what you're doing carries the weight of this might make the difference. And actually, you could extrapolate that to education in general. And we talk about it a lot. I used to meet every single cohort of candidates who came for a job in the trust. We're just too big for me to do that now. But, you know, talking about, there's a lot of people who could be here and probably could do a great job, but they don't want it. And there's probably some people who should never be here. But the fact that you have chosen to be here, and we are brutally honest about what the ask is and the energy that's required and whatnot, and sometimes you don't see the payoff. You know, you talk about sending them to the moon. You're also sending the DVDs they used to send up out into space in case anybody ever received them. You're sending messages into space. Do you know if they're landing or not? Sometimes you may not, but to have that relentlessness that I'm going to keep sending those messages, I'm going to keep loading every moment with the opportunity to progress for the children in my care, you know, that's exciting. That is a vocation. That is life work as we go. And it's Martin McDonough's got a play called The Pillow Man, and there's a cop who has this long monologue, and he says, he's talking about working on domestic abuse cases, and he says, it gets me up in the morning because I'm going to change something. And that's when our trust and when our sector is at its best, is you're getting up and going, you know, praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Let's get it. Let's go. Here we go. Come on. You know, and there's got to be somebody like that. You know, the Rita Pearson, every child needs a cheerleader or whatnot. That's got to be us. That unrelenting positive regard. And so my bit when I'm going site to site is I look at one thing and one thing only. I look at culture. So teaching and learning, what does that say about our culture? Behavior, attendance, safeguarding, environment. What does that say about our culture? And what is that culture saying to the children and the staff in our care? And therefore, like a trapezius muscle, you can always add more strength. You can always add more value because it's a constantly evolving thing as we go. But yeah, it does. You're absolutely right, Steve. It's what a thing of value to say. What do? I reverse the river. You know,
Powerful. It's powerful, isn't it?
and I see it every day. Staff in all different sorts of positions who are for, you know, one child or a cohort of children. They're the difference. They're the difference makers. They're the performance enhancers, as it were. And that's fantastic. You know, and it takes me back to the work that my dad did on the west side of Chicago, sending first generation Hispanic kids with parents who mainly only spoke Spanish, sending them to Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard and places like that to do engineering and physics. Unheard of. And so that fire just continues to burn. And it's really, really exciting to be a part of and be around that.
When you talk about what gets you up in the morning and the fire that sparks it, holy work, it being something that it can't just be a box ticking exercise, and where Steve talks about go and find a different job. I think we're absolutely we can't mess around with this. We're talking about these kids we might be able to get second chance. We might be able to get other people pick it up. But the reality is that we are on borrowed time, and therefore we've got to make it count. And interestingly, many of our listeners will know, and by this point, obviously it's a New York Times bestseller, it's an Amazon bestseller. By the time this goes out, Pick and Mix Education, our new book that's just coming out, is going to be I'm kidding. It's not about that at all for us. In fact, the absolute opposite. We want to just make sure that when we're talking about pick and mix from an education perspective, we want to make sure that we help find what the spark is for each learner, what the spark is in each person, and then how do we create education for that. And I think that's what AP and really good special school education and the best teachers do in mainstream, independent, international schools as well. So it's powerful. I wonder, as we kind of bring this to land, and there's a few other bits that I know that we could go into, but you are managing, as an organization, you'll be managing complex behavior, and many of our listeners will be in mainstream education, but also in AP and in special settings where behavior is communication, but also behavior can be a challenge, right? And as somebody who has been at the chalk face for a significant amount of time and probably experiences some of the highest levels of challenge in behavior, I wonder if you could give us some suggestions around what works. And I know that is contextual, but is there anything that we could take away for our listeners about innovation around managing behavior?
I mean, I can give you what we've got, and the particulate that's left when we burnt away a lot of the other bits of the solution. And it ties into a couple of points we've discussed earlier. One, it is about culture, and culture, first and foremost, is about language. So we had a wild one, or he's been on a downer, or God, they're feral. We took the language that we use about, if we are agreeing that behavior is communication, then the communication has a feral quality to it. So why is that? As opposed to, they're feral today. It's always a Tuesday, actually, isn't it? Tuesdays are feral. And that's a closed statement.
A windy Tuesday as well, just to
Yeah.
clarify that. Like horses
And a full moon.
Yeah. Well, like, it's always a windy day, because I don't know if you know this, but actually this is a true fact that children and horses react to wind. So
it's a closed statement. They were feral today, as opposed to, well, actually, George and Maisie exhibited this. So let's interrogate what's driving that. But naming the behavior, and using language to codify it in that negative way shuts the door on that curiosity. And the culture is, then what that says to me culturally is, I have no control and I have no influence over the children, their children, who need my influence and need my input. And culturally, that's the wrong way around. So that's number one. And then going back to that mindset idea is, it's just what we were talking about, Steve, is convincing every single member of the team you can have impact on that. And I frame it when I train mainstream schools, is I start the Russian nesting doll at the statistics of permanent exclusion and the impact of permanent exclusion in this country. And we all agree we don't want that. Okay. So then what do suspensions do to fuel those PXs and those outcomes? Okay, what do detentions? What do behavior points? What do C1, C2, C3s? And take it all the way back to, this child is entering my school, my classroom, or the corridor where I am. There should be every evasive maneuver of the Black Hawk helicopter known to man, woman, and other to avoid even starting onto that pathway and that slide. And you, as a cleaner, as a history teacher, as a math department lead, as an assistant principal, as a chef, whatever it is, you can allow that student your time and your input to help them progress, but to prevent that slide as well. And it's empowering and fueling and skilling them up so that mindset becomes, every single one of us can put a dent into what is the worst thing about an education system is the kids and the outcomes of the kids who are cast out of it. So that's number two. And we do a whole training thing on the evasive maneuvers. And I actually have a very pre-AI drawn helicopter that I did by hand that I use, and you've got all the different things that you can do. Originally, it was based on the 80s computer game Spy Hunter, but nobody remembers that, so I've left that out. Anyway, and that third thing is that what the behavior, if we are talking about behavior as need or as choice or as habit, that how are we approaching each of those different beasts and reasonably adjusting towards each of those different beasts in order to re-engage the child. Whereas some behavior policies and protocols and pathways can read again, like these are the steps I need to get this child out of my classroom. These are the steps I need to make sure this child doesn't return to my classroom. And then in a wider spectrum, it then starts to escalate to isolation, suspension, permanent exclusion, as opposed to me utilizing the behavior policy in my school is utilizing it for good, not for deficit. And so it's literally sitting down and looking at where is the need in this behavior policy? Where are the relationships in this policy? Where is the curiosity in this policy? And where is the link of this policy to my teaching and learning policy in terms of a wave one provision that is fit for purpose for the needs of my children who need it the most? And looking at that potting soil of relationships and behavior that allows the learning to grow out of it rather than as two distinct and separate things. And so I talk all the time about the Jessica Jones scene where she goes and throws the gazebo over and starts ripping pieces of earth off. That's what we need to be doing whenever a child is coming off of what we need them or want them to do in front of us, is having that relentless curiosity and variety of skills and techniques and approaches to try and narrow down what is actually causing this and driving this. Is it need? Is it a gap? Is it the context of the day? As opposed to shut all of that off and I follow it. There's the first warning. There's the second warning. There's the consequence. There's the behavior point. There's the amber call out. And the SLT comes and removes, completely disempowers me as a practitioner and ensures that child, whatever we're studying at that moment, they ain't never going to pick that back up because we start cascading down there. So it's working differently and optimizing and maximizing the impact of behavior policies and protocols for good and for progress and for learning rather than just for order. Can I say that? Those are three things I would start with because I know we're running out of time.
Yes, so much to we probably could do a three-parter, and potentially I think this is where we invite back, and I know there's further conversations off the podcast that will happen as well. But we have to finish at some point, and that is just the way that it is. I used to say this thing: we could talk all night. We definitely could, and it's not even night time, so we probably could go all night. And I'm interested to hear a story. I think the movie and theatre and film references throughout this one. I think I want I want somebody to listen back and count how many, because there's been some wonderful ones. But we always finish with quick fire. And I think out of every guest that we've had, and definitely the last 6 months, I think you might struggle with this the more, Stephen, because I think you're a wonderful storyteller. But remember, you're not allowed to link it to a movie, and you've got to be quick fire.
Okay.
So I'll start, then Ben, and then I'll finish. All right?
All right.
Are you ready?
Hang on. Let me get ready. I'm okay.
Born ready.
Good.
Born ready.
Come on. Bring it.
So if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the experience, what would change overnight?
Everything.
What is the biggest myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change?
Well, they should be doing this.
If a 10-year-old asked you why they have to go to school, what would you actually say?
Done right, it will help you build whatever future you want to be possible.
Well,
Smashed it.
mate,
Smashed it.
Steve, you said that he wouldn't be able to do quickfire. He
Smashed it.
nailed
Smashed it.
quickfire. He nailed the podcast. He nailed the long form answers, and then when he got given a short form answer, he absolutely nailed it. Stephen, it's been a pleasure. Steve said that we definitely need to make this happen again. We definitely need to make it happen again. Let's get that conversation about music and education together. I'm sure that we will do. Some size. We don't want that to be like a little giveaway to people, but I'm sure we'll get that conversation happening very soon. We appreciate you joining us, and we also appreciate the passion and everything that you bring into the work that you do. Education in the UK needs more people who care like you do. So thank you for doing what you do. And in the show notes, you can find out a little bit more, connect into what Stephen's doing, and I'm sure that he is more than happy to connect to those people who are trying to do things differently.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you, buddy. Have a lovely evening, afternoon, day, whatever else is next, and we'll catch up very, very soon.
Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Steve, thank you, because I was really worried I was going to swear, although I think I did, but you did it more.
It's fine. It's fine.
And
yeah.
I hope the conference and the awards evening, that's the end of this month, isn't it?
Yep.
I hope that goes really, really well, and really look forward to speaking to you guys again. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Legend.
Stephen.
Thank you.
Cheers.